Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I'm going to talk about our integrated quality assessment within OPQ and how we handle the review of ANDAs. So I have several objectives I want to cover throughout these slides. One is to provide a background regarding the formation of OPQ and why we initiated an IQA process. The IQA process is a team-based process, so it's important for me to also identify the roles and responsibilities of those team members within the process. I will give you an overview of the actual timeline for the IQA process as it relates to a 10-month and a review cycle. And also, we generate a final review document. I want to give you some of the key concepts related to that IQA document as well. All right? So OPQ was launched in January of 2015. And it was launched to establish a single quality discipline for the review of applications. And that single discipline was supposedly combine and integrate the desktop review that we currently have, as well as the facility inspection process. So it was an integration of both of these. Also, what we wanted to do was leverage different specialized expertise. We recognize that nowadays, most of the process and products are becoming a lot more complex than they used to be. So we identify that in order to keep up with that, there are certain expertise that might be needed. For instance, you might not necessarily want an analytical chemist reviewing the continuous manufacturing process because they may have different expertise and knowledge base. So historically, we usually had one reviewer that did all of the quality review. We recognized in order to keep up with the changing environment that we wanted to start looking at the different expertise and start grooming people for specific expertise as these applications become more complex. So in doing that, we form a team of which that team then works together to generate a one quality voice or one quality document. Right? So I talk about a team. These are the core team members or core team disciplines, sub-disciplines associated with the IQA process. And I'll go through the different ones, and I'll go through some of their roles and responsibilities a little short later. But you have the regulatory business process manager, along with the application technical lead, that will basically lead the team from the beginning of the process throughout the end and try to align all the roles and responsibilities within the team. Then you will have a drug substance or a DMF reviewer. They would review the API manufacturing and the characteristics of the API. You have a drug product reviewer. They would review the characteristics of the finished dosage form, as well as any intermediates associated with that. And then you have a process reviewer. A process reviewer will look at the manufacturing process for those finished dosage forms, as well as the intermediates. Facility reviewer would be responsible for the actual facility GMP compliance. They will work very closely with our field investigators to ensure that inspections that are needed are done and any issues are resolved. And then you have a biopharm reviewer that will look at the dissolution methodology associated with the product. Mainly, they will be pulled in mainly for oral solid dosage manufacturing. We also have a microbiologist. If there is sterile manufacturing, sterile product, they would look at the sterile manufacturing process. And again, as I mentioned previously, you would have an ORA investigator, a person who goes out in the field to do the inspections. And keep in mind, for an investigator, there could be multiple investigators because they're looking at different facilities. So the numbers can be anywhere from 1 to maybe even 10 or so, depending on the number of facilities associated with it. So those are the primary team members, we also could pull in, depending on the application, other disciplines or other expertise. For instance, laboratory policy. If it's a medical device, we would bring in CDER. Right? So this is the OPQ organization. So I wanted to give you an idea where these disciplines or subdisciplines actually fit within the organization. And so you can see throughout, you had different offices in which they are located. You can see the Office of Process and Facilities had 3 different disciplines associated with that. They house the microbiology, process, and the facility reviewer. And then also, as I mentioned previously, we could pull in other expertise throughout the office or outside of the offices as well if it was deemed fit. All right, so I'm going to go into some of the roles and responsibilities of those team members. You have the RBPM, or Regulatory Business Process Manager. Again, they work very closely with the ATL, or Application Technical Lead, to champion the review process through, with the RPPM focused more on the process and timelines, making sure that we meet timelines, communicating updating the status of the application with all of our stakeholders. And they also represent or is the point of contact for our applicant. So any communication with the applicant will go through, as it relates to quality, go through the RBPM. And then also they are responsible for ensuring that the information within the within our administrative records are complete and that we have the documentation in there to justify our review. And then they would do the communication to our stakeholder regarding our recommendation. The ATL, again, like I say, they work with the RBPM, but they focus primarily on the technical or scientific process, part of the process, where they would work with the team to resolve any differences within the team. They would work with them on crafting any of the communication that's associated to go out, whether it's an information request or deficiencies. And since they are the technical lead, they ultimately are the one that would render the final quality decision or recommendation. Now, of course, that is from input from all the different subdisciplines. So generally, that decision becomes fairly easy because you have all the input at the very end. But they are responsible for giving that recommendation. Right. And then you have the primary reviewers. They are the ones that actually perform the actual scientific review, and for each subdiscipline, they render their own separate recommendation for that application. Again, they would work together as a team to determine if there's any issues, anything that need to be resolved. If there's anything new or precedent setting, they'll bring that up to leadership to make sure that those are addressed. And then also, one thing we found that has been very beneficial over time is having the review team actually participate on the inspections. So, for instance, if during that review you find things that we find things that we identify that should be verified or that might be critical to understand and to make sure it's covered, then they may also participate and go with the ORA investigator on that inspection. Right? And then there's a secondary reviewer. So for each primary reviewer, there generally is a secondary reviewer. It may depend if this is a low risk or a medium risk, there might not be a secondary reviewer. But a secondary reviewer, their primary role is to provide guidance to the reviewer, to concur on their review, to ensure that there is an office concurrence on the final recommendation. And then also to address any disciplinary concerns as far as any issues that are raised, any precedent setting. They will also help and assist in resolving any of those. Okay, so I'm going to go through what a 10-month review cycle looks like from a high level. Okay, which you probably talked about this morning was the filing review. OGD does the filing review. That occurs within the first 60 days of the review cycle. It can and generally finishes earlier than that, but we allotted 60 days for that. Simultaneous to that is we're forming our team. We look in the application to determine what are the team disciplines that are required, and we start getting people assigned to that application. Historically, this didn't happen until after we determined that it was received for filing. However, we're starting to move this up earlier to get more familiar with the application sooner, and possibly our next one, Bob Gaines will also talk about communication. We wanted to try to get some earlier communication out, so this allows us to be able to do that if we assign people earlier. As soon as the application has been filed or received, the team then has a kickoff meeting. That kickoff meeting, the focus of that is to align the roles and responsibilities of all the team members, as well as to establish timelines for completion of interim steps within that process. And one of those interim steps is, when should we send out, whether it's an information request, when should we send out any deficiencies to the applicant? Because generally what we want to do is send that as a full consolidated information request or deficiency. So that kickoff meeting help us establish those timelines for which that should happen. Also, I want to mention, we started to incorporate a mid-cycle review as well, a mid-cycle meeting, internal mid-cycle meeting, in which we talk more scientific discussions. And that also aligns with some of the requirements that will occur with GDUFA 2. Next, once we have the kickoff meeting, then the next major milestone really is sending out that communication. I'll let Dr. Gaines go into details on that, but basically, we allow it time to send out communication and then receive that communication and have back and forth communication if needed. We target to have inspections done by month 7.5. And then part of that is that we request those during that whole assignment phase, during the filing phase, we determine which inspections are needed. And then, given the time, allows us to give 7.5 months to be able to finish that inspection. And then, if there is a need, there's also additional opportunity to have follow-up communication, to send out information requests and get responses back if needed. And once that's done, we wrap up a review, finalize our documentation by month 9 in order to take an action on the application by month 10. So that's sort of at a high level what the review cycle would look like. All right. One of the keys to the success of the IQA is basically team collaboration. You could have anywhere from 6 or 8 primary reviewers, including their secondary reviewers. So the whole communication is important to the success of that. And that's why, one, we had the kickoff meeting, which I mentioned. We're starting to implement the mid-cycle, also the mid-cycle meeting, which is also part of GDUFA 2. And then whenever there is any need for additional communication, whether there are different topics that might come up, we could also have ad hoc meetings as well. I previously mentioned about facility reviewer. That facility reviewer, along with the communication with the investigator, is very important because, as you're aware, the investigator is not necessarily on site, so that communication, they're not as familiar with the contents of the application. So the facility reviewer provides more detailed information associated with that application and work very closely with them to make sure that the coverage in the inspection is adequate for what we see in the application. And this is just a pictorial illustration of the collaboration. I thought it was a good slide, so I wanted to put that in there to show that there is a collaboration within the review team to get what we call our one quality voice to our customers. Right? So now I want to talk about the actual document, the actual review document, what that consists of. At a high level, we have the executive summary. That executive summary provides, most importantly, our final recommendation. What did we say? Are we approving this? Are we tentatively approving this? Or are we going to do a complete response? That is identified in the executive summary. It also, for each discipline, give a high-level summary of that review, of their findings. And then if we determine that we need to take a complete response, and it also lists the deficiencies in it as well. Additional to that document, there is a very detailed summary or detailed review that each subdiscipline performs. So each one has their own, are responsible for generating a review and also a recommendation from their subdiscipline. So that's also included in this IQA document as well. And then that document then gets forwarded and sent to OGD as our final communication. And this is just, again, another pictorial of what that is. It's basically, you have our IQA document being sent to our OGD for its our final communication to them as far as our recommendation. So in summary, I want to mention that the IQA establishes that one discipline, quality subdiscipline, that then provides a one quality voice to our customer. Again, I want to mention that the team collaboration is very important. We do that throughout the review cycle to ensure that we get the appropriate quality discipline or quality review that we need. And then again, the ATL and the RPPM works very closely to work through the team to make sure that the high quality document is achieved. And then finally, I want to mention the single quality voice is what the whole idea behind the OPQ formation, the IQA, so that we have one single voice for quality as opposed to multiple disciplines within the quality organization. Right. And that's all I have.